I told you I am not going to let this happen!
My name is Jessica Chen. I'm 28, and numbers are how I stop time. Give me a ledger, and I can rewind a decade. Give me a transfer memo, and I can reconstruct motive. From the sidewalk, my family looked like a Christmas catalog. Picture-perfect colonial in Portland, Oregon. White shutters, a maple that blushes red each autumn. Inside, perfection was theater, and I was the stagehand in the rafters, pulling ropes no one could see. Dad mowed on Saturdays. Mom waved from the porch. My younger sister Amanda smiled like sunlight. I kept the machinery humming. The message that changed everything arrived at 11:27 p.m. Slicing the dark like a flare. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. I didn't tap it open twice. I didn't need to. The words stamped through my skin and into bone. I braced for the riot, panic, anger, disbelief. But what settled was quieter, steadier, like a level finding center. If home can be taken with a lock, it isn't a home. If love can evaporate with a text, it isn't love. What they sent wasn't an ending. It was proof. Date, time, intent, written in their own hands. A hinge I would swing the whole story on. Apprenticeship in our house began with ladders and laughter. I was 14, the first time Dad barked an order instead of asking. Jessica, grab the ladder. We're fixing the gutters. Jessica, hold the flashlight. Saturday mornings smelled like wet leaves and gutter rot. My palms peeled under rope, shoulders aching from lumber, and every time I winced, Dad ruffled my hair. You're tougher than any son I could have asked for. Mom's catechism followed. Family helps family, while Amanda stood in ballet pink socks, the household's delicate orchid. If I was the root in the dirt, she was the bloom in curated light. I didn't resent it then. Splinters were character, blisters were lessons. By 17, saying no felt like cruelty. Money arrived the way water does, first a trickle, then the plumbing rerouted to run through me. Things are tight, Mom would sigh. Could you cover the electric? It sounded like passing the salt. Pride is a dangerous currency. It buys debts you never meant to hold. The electric became a mortgage top-up. The mortgage became utilities during emergencies. Emergencies became temporary transfers. Dad initiated from my account with notes that looked like promises. Help, temporary, just for now. While Amanda posted Florence sunsets, Italian light in her hair, studio pencils like a bouquet. I ate instant noodles at my desk after 12-hour shifts, soothing myself with the fantasy that responsibility is rewarded. Love wears logic's clothes when you've been trained to live on crumbs. It wasn't one big betrayal that woke me. It was the hush after my name. Family future planning conversations shifted when I entered. My contribution was the bass note no one wrote into the score. Then March, late, tax season pressing on my spine like a hand, the kitchen light on, voices braided at the table. I almost ghosted past. Then I heard it. The deed is in our names only, Mom said, soft as confession. Jessica doesn't realize all her help was voluntary. She won't get anything when we sell. Dad chuckled, a sound I didn't recognize. She's never asked for paperwork, classic Jessica. All heart, no business sense. Amanda, hesitant. But won't she expect something? Expect what? Mom snorted. She gave gifts. Gifts don't buy ownership. My knuckles went white against the wall. I didn't cry, I didn't confront. There's power in refusal, refusing their timeline, their scene, their alibi. I walked to my room, closed the door like a careful valve, opened my laptop, and did what my mind does. I built a file. Every receipt for shingles, bought when the roof leaked. Every transfer labeled temporary. Every hardship utility payment, cross-checked against the savings they actually had. Savings I'd later verify when the records came under light. I priced my labor at conservative market rates, not to invoice childhood, but because the court would need numbers to see what I'd been trained to ignore. I didn't know the doctrines yet, but I would. Unjust enrichment, constructive trust, promissory estoppel, equitable lien. I wasn't hunting revenge. I was building an index. Documentary calm is a muscle. I strengthened it. I sent for old statements. I resurrected forgotten portals to download missing bills. I stitched dates to amounts, notes to outcomes, mortgage current here, lien avoided there, property tax penalty prevented. Dad's casual arrogance, his disdain for clean books, became my secret ally. Mom's love of control left a trail of tidy subject lines. Urgent, mortgage, temporary, promise, make it up. Intent isn't loud on paper, it's cumulative. I met 3 attorneys in offices that smelled like paper and citrus cleaner. No hysteria, just dates, amounts, and the phrases my parents liked when they wanted me to move money. Each lawyer said a version of the same thing. Equity isn't only ink. Courts recognize stake when someone has contributed money and labor in reliance on assurances, especially when the benefiting party later moves to exclude. And this, one asked when I slid over the screenshot, timestamp crisp as a blade. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Judges, he said gently, do not admire cruelty dressed as cleverness. It would be easy to flatten my parents into villains. That's not accurate. They thanked me. They hugged me. They also built a system that turned my reliability into a resource and called it virtue. The social script, eldest child duty, dependable daughter, filial availability, wears different costumes in different homes. Mine wore tool belts and spreadsheets. It thrives anywhere gift is a ribbon tied around obligations you never agreed to. The machine is efficient. It asks the same few people 1,000 small things and calls their depletion love. At 11:27 p.m., their text tried to exile me. At 11:29, I made myself a promise. I would not be baited into a driveway argument at midnight or a door-pounding scene that could be misfiled as my volatility. This was a paper case. I would treat that house like the ledger I'd balanced for 14 years and make the law read it with me. There's a picture I still see when I close my eyes, the colonial's clappered seam where I brushed paint into the narrowest gaps, gutters I cleared of maple helicopters until my fingers pruned. A sump pump I replaced in a storm while Dad shouted directions from the dry steps. I think about the other women I've known, quiet engines holding structures together, treated like parts to be swapped when convenient. It isn't only an Asian household thing, though culture shapes the choreography. It's a cross-zip code economy, extraction wrapped as loyalty. Numbers don't lie. Stories teach you to ignore them. Morning came clean. At 7, sun made bars through the blinds. I'd already showered, set the screen captures in a folder labeled exhibits, and poured coffee I didn't taste. When my attorney picked up, I didn't rehearse. File the petition, I said. Justice isn't always a gavel slam. Sometimes it's a stack of pages sliding under fluorescent light that bleaches the sentiment out of a room. Sometimes it's a hinge, the lock they changed, swinging a very heavy door. Understand this before we go further. I don't tell this for the pleasure of watching anyone fall. I tell it because if you too have kept shoebox receipts, if you can chart the slope of your generosity and watch someone else's comfort rise in lockstep, you deserve to know the ending isn't exile. Home isn't a lock. It's every line item the world told you didn't count. Count them, and the keys change hands. This isn't revenge for revenge's sake. It's a correction delivered with paperwork and precision. The text meant to break me became the timestamp that anchored my case. The house meant to shut me out became the asset I would split. The girl trained to be grateful learned to be exact. I'll show you the kitchen table conspiracy, the quiet months of curation, the fluorescent conference room where folders slid like chess pieces, and the morning a court order warmed in my hands like new keys. But first, you need to see the pattern the way I learned it. One task at a time, one transfer at a time, until the math corrected the myth. If childhood is supposed to be a meadow, mine had a workshop bolted to one end. The meadow was real enough, schoolyard laughter, the smell of popped tar bubbles on summer streets, but there was always a door at the edge of it with Dad's voice behind it. Jessica, grab the ladder. Jessica, hold the flashlight. The first time my palms blistered, I remember being almost proud. 14. A borrowed tool belt slung too low on my hips, the ladder's feet shuddering on damp grass as I climbed toward a clogged gutter that coughed out maple helicopters and gray rot. The sky had that Portland white that pretends to be brightness. Rain gathered on the gutter lip, thick with a year's neglect. My fingers went numb. Dad steadied the ladder with one hand, and with the other ruffled my hair. "You're tougher than any son I could have asked for," he said, grinning as if I'd just joined a secret order. Behind the screen door, Mom nodded, a tea towel in her hands, the catechism already on her tongue. Family helps family. Amanda, 2 years younger and in ballet pink socks, pressed her face to the glass and mouthed careful. Careful was for orchids. I was the root. The house learned my hands the way a violin learns a shoulder, quietly through repetition. Saturdays were sawdust, the sweet prick smell of cedar shingles, sandpaper grit lodged under my nails like a second cuticle. I learned to coil extension cords without tangles, to read the slow heartbeat of a sump pump, to move my weight low when I carried drywall so the wind wouldn't torque me into a sail. It felt like inheriting a language, say, socket wrench, and I could tell you the size we'd worn to a shine. Say joist, and I could see Dad's forefinger trace the air the way a conductor marks a beat. There were jokes, always jokes, the kind that sound like love when you haven't learned their cost. "My girls got an iron back," Dad would say, to neighbors who stopped to admire a new fence line, not mentioning my wrists, which throbbed at night as if I'd been playing an invisible piano for hours. "Amanda's our delicate one, artistic," Mom said at church after service. People smiled and nodded at each of us as if the roles fit like clothes. The compliments slid in like small coins, and I saved them as proof that what hurt was noble. There's a way families turn labor into virtue until you can't tell the difference. It wasn't child exploitation, not in the legal sense I'd learn much later. It was the softer, more efficient machine, training a dependable daughter to wear usefulness like a crown. 14 bled into 15 and 17. The ladder got taller, the jobs heavier, the praise more polished. There was the winter storm where the power went out at dinner, and Dad's eyes cut to me before the candles were even found. "Breakers," he said, and I pulled on boots and went into the garage where the concrete remembered the day's cold. I held the phone's flashlight between my teeth while flipping switches and listening for the hum to return, tasting metal and battery heat at the back of my tongue. There was the roof day when the shingles were slick as fish, and Dad insisted we could beat the rain if we hustled. Halfway up, the ladder slid an inch, and I felt fear cut clean through my stomach. He steadied it, barked, 3 more, as if fear were a test I could pass if I just moved faster. When I climbed down, knees shaking, he clapped my shoulder like a coach. "See, tougher than any boy." In those years, I learned the map of the crawl space better than the map of my own city. I knew the dead outlets, the slow drain in the upstairs bath that needed snaking every 3 months, the exact weight of the shop vac when it was 1 inch from full. I missed a birthday sleepover because the kitchen ceiling bowed like a pregnant belly, water lines spidering the paint. "We can't call a contractor every time," Mom said, not unkindly, just as if it were obvious. "Family helps family." I believed her. I believed them so completely that saying no felt like slapping a hand that fed me. At school, I kept the weight of weekend labor quiet. It felt strangely glamorous to have a secret life, like a hero in the wrong genre, while classmates traded stories about club soccer and mall jobs. I found myself studying their hands. No crescent scars from sheet metal. No faint trapezoid of sander rash on the heel of the palm. I wasn't jealous. I was cataloging. That's what my brain does with patterns long before my heart knows what they are. The first time my body tried to invoice my devotion, I was 16, a science fair project, the kind that required poster board and a delicate model. Sat half-finished on the dining table. Dad came home with lumber in the truck and a brand new urgency in his voice. "Fence posts before the weekend. We've got to set them now while the ground's good." I said, "My project's due Monday," and the room turned a degree colder. "We all make sacrifices," Mom said, almost softly, as if fairness were a song you hum. I set posts until dusk turned the yard into a bruise. Then I tried to finish a diorama with hands that shook. The model looked fine. The grade was fine. The fineness sat like a pebble in my shoe for a year. The language of our house always returned to character. If I was tired, the subtext was that tiredness is how good people feel when they've earned their keep. When I bled on a newel post, Dad said, "Means you're doing it right," and dabbed the spot with a shop rag before the stain set. When Amanda didn't want to help, Mom laughed like bells and said, "Delicate," then added, "We need her hands for art." It took me a long time to hear the second sentence as a sentence. We need your hands for work. Filial piety wasn't a phrase in our living room, but the concept lived there, draped over every chair. Eldest daughter duty wears different costumes in different families. Sometimes it's a casserole and spreadsheets. Sometimes it's roofs and drains. In ours, it was both. The roof I patched at dusk, the spreadsheet I balanced after midnight, because Dad couldn't reconcile receipts to save his life. He'd drop a shoebox on the counter with a boyish grin and say, "You're the smart one, Jess," and I'd feel a balloon of pride rise in my chest, even as I stared down a chaos of paper that smelled like gasoline, sawdust, and coffee. Pride is glue. It holds together systems that would otherwise rattle themselves apart. I don't want to paint my parents as villains in these years. That would be too easy, and it wouldn't be honest. They thanked me. They hugged me. Mom cooked my favorite soup on Sundays. Dad took me for drives where he talked about his father and how men used to build what they lived in, as if legacy were something you could plane to thickness. He believed we were a team. He believed that meant I would always be available. Love and expectation braided until it looked like rope, and I climbed hand over hand without noticing the burn. Money slid in at the edges of this arrangement, the way rain finds the smallest seam. At first, it was casual, a soft-voiced, "Things are tight. Could you grab the electric this month?" While she slid a stack of envelopes toward me, not quite looking me in the eye. It felt grown up to say yes. I had a part-time job at the coffee shop then, later an admin job after school that paid better. Passing cash to the household made me feel like I was stepping onto the adult side of a line. The second time it came with a narrative. Dad had a slow quarter. The mortgage would be late without a bridge. "Just a top-up," he said, wrapping an arm around my shoulder as if the ask itself were a hug. I transferred the money and printed the confirmation like a kid who just learned to swim and wanted proof she'd touched the far wall. The third time wasn't an ask, not exactly. It was a transfer Dad initiated from my account, with a note that read temporary. It showed up as a ping on my phone while I was in the library annotating a macroeconomics chapter. For a second, I thought I'd made a mistake with my own bills. When I asked him later, half apologetic, he waved his hand. "Banking app's easier from your account. I'll settle it in a week." He said it like he was doing me a favor. A week passed. Another note appeared. Help. There are words that ring louder than their letters. Help is one of them, especially when you've been trained to hear it as your name. What I couldn't see then was the way these asks were etching a groove. The house had always taken my Saturdays. Now it took my balance. The transition felt organic, inevitable, even loving, like the way a river carves its bed over years, until the bend seems to be the water's idea. I told myself I was strong, responsible, exactly the person I would choose to be. Strong is a beautiful word. It can hide 1,000 extra pounds. I wish I could say there was a single moment where I understood what was happening, a flashbulb revelation, a slammed door. But that belongs to other stories. Mine changed through repetition. A wire nut here, a bill there, a small smile. When Amanda's new paint set arrived and Mom said, "Isn't it nice we can make room for her talent?" The smile cracked a little when I realized the room was the one I had just emptied. If you've never counted what you carry, it's hard to explain the slow dread that lives in useful hands. They reach, they fix, they hold, they almost never ask. I didn't learn to ask in those years. I learned to anticipate. I learned to see what the house would need before it said it. That is a gift in the world and a liability at home. It makes you very good at disappearing in plain sight. The shift to money wasn't a betrayal yet. It was the next logical step of a system that had trained me well. The first time Mom said, "Could you cover gas this week? Amanda's got a school trip," I had already opened my budgeting app. The numbers clicked. I moved funds. The house exhaled. Somewhere inside me, a tally began. Faint pencil lines on the wall of an unlit room. I didn't plan to return to those marks, not yet, but the room existed, and my hand knew where the pencil was. By the time I turned 18, the workshop door at the edge of the meadow was never fully shut. If Dad wasn't calling from it, the door called itself. Hinges that needed oil, a squeal I could hear even from the supposed soft parts of my life. Family helps family. The phrase kept its shine a long time. It would take years and a single text flashing at 11:27 p.m. for me to realize shine is not the same as light. Money never arrives wearing a villain's cape. It shows up in soft clothes with plausible reasons and good timing, and it uses your own virtues as a key. After the years of ladders and socket wrenches, shifting from labor to financing didn't feel like a coup. It felt like graduation. The first months were almost ceremonial. An electric bill here, groceries there, a bridge for a mortgage payment while Dad's quarter ran slow. I was 18 and proud of my neat little budget app, the way I could forecast cash flow like weather. The ask landed, the graph dipped, the household sun came back out. Everyone was grateful. Gratitude is a warm light. It makes you less likely to notice the shadow that comes with it. By 19, I had a rhythm. Classes by morning, admin shifts by afternoon, evening spreadsheets for a small e-commerce firm that paid me by the hour to straighten the knots out of their customer data. The work suited me. There's a quiet satisfaction in balancing columns until the numbers stop wobbling. At home, I became the person who could make a crisis dissolve in the space between "could you" and "thank you." Mom's phrases were careful, even tender. "Things are tight. Could you grab internet this month?" Dad's requests were more kinetic, half hugs and hopeful eyebrows. I cued transfers at my desk with a kind of reverence reserved for ritual. Temporary, the notes often read, as if the word itself were a rope bridge leading back to equilibrium. The temporary stretched. It became the kind of temporary that entire lives build on. Dad's banking app began pinging me first. He took liberties with linked accounts, permissions sliding into assumptions, the way damp slides into wood. The transfer memos were friendly, sometimes even playful. Help, or just for now. The emoticon was always what hooked me, proof in alphanumeric smile that love sat behind the ask. I screenshotted everything, not because I planned to weaponize it, but because that's what I do when the world starts to blur. The archive felt like a scrapbook, a family record written in decimals. Amanda turned 16 and unwrapped a set of keys tied with a ribbon so wide it could have been a sash. The car sparkled under our Maple's red spill, a metallic grin, and she stood beside it like a girl in a catalog, light sweater, soft scarf. The future angled just right for sunlight. "She's worked so hard," Mom said to me, brisk with affection. And I agreed because art is work and practice is work, and there's no ledger that can price how long it takes to trust your own hands. I posed with them, 3 women at the crest of a small hill, and later that night I refreshed my bank balance and moved money to cover a temporary gap on the mortgage. There are scenes that only make sense side by side. The photograph and the transfer confirmation belong to the same page. I don't want to make Amanda a foil she doesn't deserve to be. She painted with serious eyes and stayed up late with pencil smudges on her wrist. She hugged me often. She wasn't the architect of any of this. She was the beneficiary of a blueprint she didn't draft. What matters is the system that drew the lines, delicate on one axis, dependable on the other, and the way the house poured its resources down the slope it had built. My hours thickened. When the e-commerce firm realized I could clean more than customer data, they added vendor reconciliation and inventory anomalies to my plate. "You have a mind for nets," my manager said, meaning the kind that catch what slips through. The praise hummed like caffeine. I took on extra shifts during peak season. I ate microwaved noodles at my desk more often than not. The sting of seasoning bright as cheap fireworks on my tongue. My phone vibrated. Dad, again, with another "just this once" that had stopped being once a long time ago. I moved money around the way an air traffic controller moves planes, careful of timing and which runway has the least crosswind. If you've never had your family's comfort run through your hands like this, it's hard to explain the way your own wants go quiet. It wasn't martyrdom. It was mechanics. We had a system and I was its pump. By 21, the ledger in my head had chapters. I could tell you, if someone had asked, how many times I covered the gas bill during winters when prices spiked, or the number of emergencies that coincided suspiciously with Amanda's program deposits, or the months Dad forgot property tax, until the notice wore red. No one asked. I didn't volunteer. The ritual worked better unspoken. In our house, silence was how you signaled maturity. You understood what was needed without making a show of what it cost you. There were bright things. The day Amanda's Italy program acceptance arrived, we all screamed like we'd won a small lottery. Mom printed the email and stuck it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. Dad bought tiramisu from the fancy bakery and insisted we eat dessert before dinner, grinning with a boyishness that cut 5 years off his face. "We'll make it happen," he said, as if magic were a budget line. I washed the tiramisu dish late that night and moved the magnet so it wouldn't get splashed. Then I opened my laptop and made a plan to float the next 3 tight months, because tightness had a way of expanding to fill whatever container you offered it. Here's what documentary work looks like when you don't know you're doing it yet. You click download statement each month because neatness soothes you. You keep receipts not because you're suspicious, but because you love the symmetry of cause and effect. You annotate transfers with dates, not names, because you still believe the narrative matters less than the math. And you do all of this with an unhurried hand, convinced, truly, that you will never need to show anyone your box of proof. There were whispers. Family future planning came up more often at Sunday dinner. And sometimes, when I walked into the kitchen with a tray of glasses, the conversation folded into itself like paper. "Oh, it's nothing," Mom would say, too brightly, smoothing a napkin that didn't need smoothing, just thinking out loud. I told myself, generous as always, that maybe they were planning surprises, anniversaries, birthdays, good things that shrink under observation. I told myself discretion was love, and that to press for information would be to ruin a cake by opening the oven too soon. The problem with training a person to be useful is that it blunts her instinct to ask what she's building. At 22, I could have produced a spreadsheet quantifying exactly how much I had contributed to the running of our small domestic economy. Electric, gas, internet, 4 mortgage top-ups, and the floating fund I kept quietly ready for tight month alerts. I didn't. I ran a different sheet, the one with my own future. A graduate program maybe, or a move to a sunnier city. The tabs sat across the top of my screen like small doors. I clicked them when the house slept. I priced what a life could cost if it belonged to me. And yet the asks kept coming. They were never ugly. They didn't need to be. The ugliest thing they did was assume. "You're the responsible one," Dad would say, half pride, half license, patting the countertop as if tapping my name in invisible ink. "We don't know what we'd do without you," Mom would add, the softest hand on my shoulder. The kind of gratitude that tastes like sugar even as it rots the enamel. If this sounds harsh, it's because hindsight turns the volume up on certain frequencies. In it, I can hear the chorus of other daughters and eldest sons and reliable children who became informal annuities for their families, who thought clarity was unkind and questions were disloyal. The social script is older than all of us, the child who can absorbs what the household cannot. When it works, it looks like love. When it doesn't, it sounds like that midnight text. The first real hairline crack came not from a big ask, but from the small oddity of timing. Mom floated an emergency in the same week I saw her new bracelet catch the kitchen light. A slim chain that could have been costume, but for the way she touched it, absent-mindedly, like a secret she couldn't help petting. I caught myself calculating. I didn't say a word. The second crack was Dad's temporary note resurfacing for a sum he had already promised to settle last month. The third was Amanda's careful question about whether I'd be around for a family future planning chat next Sunday, delivered with that voice people use when they've already spoken in a room you weren't in. Cracks widen on their own once you stop painting them. The house creaked with it. My stomach began to feel like the crawl space, low and damp and busy with things that don't like light. I started writing dates beside amounts in a little paper notebook I kept in my nightstand, not to accuse, but to remember, because the days were speeding up and my brain needed anchors. It felt disloyal to write it down. It felt more disloyal not to. If you've ever been slowly drafted into underwriting the plot of your own erasure, you'll recognize this part. The way the room stills when your name approaches and then swerves. The way your usefulness is treated like an inexhaustible resource. The way gifts become gifts with a silent asterisk that can be invoked against you later. I wasn't there yet. Not fully, but the math was whispering through the walls. The night when whispers became words with edges, I came home late. Tax season's weight riding my shoulders like a wet coat. The kitchen light made a bright island in the dark house. Voices rose and fell at the table, my name threaded through them like a seam. I froze, just for a moment, just long enough to realize that the meadow door had swung open again, and that behind it a different workshop waited, one with paper, not tools. I took a step back, breath held, and made a choice that would reroute everything. I did not walk in. I listened. And when they spoke, the numbers sharpened into a story the law would understand. The kitchen had its own weather. Even at night, it held the day's warmth, the faint steam of dishwater, the lingering sweetness of whatever Amanda had baked last. That night, the light made islands on the tabletop, and the three of them, Mom, Dad, Amanda, leaned toward each other as if the center could protect them from the rest of the house. There's a sound that happens when you accidentally enter a conversation not meant for you. A quick catching of breath, words going brittle. This time there was no catch. They didn't know I was there yet, shadowed by the hallway, tax season fatigue, making me a quieter ghost than usual. The deed is in our names only, Mom said, voice low, precise, the tone she used with paperwork. Jessica doesn't realize all her help was voluntary. She won't get anything when we sell. Dad's laugh was a kind I had never heard in daylight. She's never asked for paperwork. Classic Jessica. All heart, no business sense. Amanda's voice was a shade softer, edged with uncertainty. But won't she expect something? Mom snorted, a small, unkind sound I felt in the soles of my feet. Expect what? She gave gifts. Gifts don't buy ownership. It would have been easy, almost righteous, to storm in then, to rattle plates, to break the quiet in a way that matched the breaking inside my ribs. But the part of me trained by Saturdays and socket wrenches knew that impulse is how ladders slip. I stepped back, letting the darkness of the hallway wrap me, and decided not to give them a scene they could later hold up as evidence of my volatility. I would not be their alibi. I would be their accountant. In my room, I closed the door with the same care I used for shutting off water valves, slow enough not to jolt the system. I sat at my desk and opened the laptop. The screen's glow made a truthful square in the night. I created a folder and titled it with something neutral, House 2010 onward. I breathed once, twice, the way you do, before lifting a weight you know has corners. Then I began. Document hunter is too dramatic a phrase for what it felt like. It was more like sorting a long-neglected drawer. I already had the bones. Monthly statements saved because neatness soothed me. Emailed confirmations in a subfolder I'd called Utilities for no reason, other than it kept the inbox from feeling like a junk drawer. Photos of receipts I'd taken on a whim when I was learning a new accounting app. I pulled them into the light and laid them side by side. Numbers tell their own story if you arrange them with enough quiet. First, the transfers. Dad's initiations from my account, labeled temporary or help, or once his favorite smiley. A colon and a parenthesis that made my face heat when I saw it now, not from affection, but from the tiny humiliation of being played like a friendly piano. I made a ledger. Date, amount, note, downstream event, bill paid, mortgage current, property tax avoided. Then came the direct payments, the electric bills when rates spiked, the gas during cold snaps, the emergency ahead of property taxes with late fees looming in red. Each line got a row. Each row got a reference number and a scanned proof. The house repairs were less tidy. Receipts for shingles, contractor quotes I'd downloaded but hadn't used because we couldn't call a pro every time. Boxes from the hardware store with faded thermal paper showing nails, primer, flashing joint compound. I built a second sheet. Materials, dates, purpose, and a column I labeled comparable labor. what it would have cost if we'd hired someone with a license and a business card. I wasn't trying to invoice childhood. I was valuing participation. There is a difference, even if families prefer the blur. The totals started to assemble themselves like a bridge you watch take shape beam by beam. $47,000 in mortgage contributions, $23,000 in renovation supplies and repairs, $15,000 in utilities during tight months that coincided suspiciously with summer trips, holiday spending, and once the week after Amanda's tuition deposit cleared. $85,000 with asterisks, and then the years that can't be reduced to rows. Weekends on ladders, roofs slick with rain, sump pumps and drywall, and the quiet, unheralded vigilance of catching a leak before it blooms. I didn't put a number on that yet. I knew the court, if we got that far, would need one. But that night, the valuations felt like trying to price skimming out the cost of learning to breathe. I went further than my own records. I sent requests to the bank for older statements. I clicked through a half-dozen online portals, resurrecting accounts I'd used once to pay a stray invoice. I asked for copies of bills in my name and downloaded the PDFs like a woman building an ark from paper. When I hit a wall, a missing month, a blurry scan, I wrote myself a note in the margin. Subpoena if necessary. The word felt dramatic in my mouth. On the page, it was just a tool. Dad's arrogance was a gift I would not have called a gift before. He treated record-keeping like an insult, as if receipts were a moral judgment, and not just proof that the world had happened. His mess made my clarity possible. Mom's voice, the one that sounded like paperwork, had another side too. Zeal for control. She forwarded emails with subject lines like urgent, mortgage, and then tucked those threads into folders labeled done, never noticing that done was a wish, not a status. Amanda had almost no paper trail at all. Her contributions were art supplies and studio rent that she covered by teaching classes and babysitting, and I found myself correcting a reflex to be angry at her. She hadn't drafted this blueprint. She was just living under its roof. By 2 a.m., my desk looked like a case file. Not pretty, nothing like the television version with color-coded tabs and photos pinned with red string, but legible, rows and columns, references and notes. A handful of printouts for the items that felt like keystones. It was tempting even then to text them a photo, to say, "See, you tried to make me file under daughter, and I filed under owner." I put my phone face down and instead opened a new document, this one titled simply, Theory. The law is a language I'm not fluent in, but I know how to diagram a sentence. I started listing doctrines I'd heard in passing, and then looked them up, careful to avoid the rabbit holes of message boards and self-help legal sites. Unjust enrichment, a party benefits at another's expense, in circumstances that the law sees as unjust, demanding restitution. Constructive trust, an equitable remedy where the court recognizes that although title is in A's name, equity regards B as the true beneficiary of part of the property. Promissory estoppel, where a promise relied upon to one's detriment can be enforced even in the absence of a formal contract. Equitable lien, a right over property to secure a debt or contribution when fairness demands it. None of this was legal advice. All of it was scaffolding. I used it not to argue, but to organize. The case wasn't in the doctrine, it was in the dates. I slept an hour, 2, maybe, on top of the covers, the blue of the screen ghosting my eyelids long after I closed the laptop. At 7 on the dot, sunlight knifed in through the blinds, and I was sitting up with a coffee before I remembered I'd meant to set an alarm. The phone felt heavy and clean in my hand. When my attorney picked up on the second ring, I said my name, then I need to book time today. Urgent. He heard something in my voice and didn't make me sell the urgency. His office smelled like paper and citrus cleaner, the way rooms do when their job is to hold facts that make people sweat. I laid the folder down like a meal I'd cooked myself. He didn't smile at the neatness. Good lawyers don't reward presentation. He asked me to walk him through it as if the numbers were a story. They told me last night the deed is in their names, I said, keeping my voice steady. I always knew that part. What I didn't know was the plan to sell without me. I paused. They described my contributions as gifts. He nodded a little, the way people do when a plot they've seen before hits its expected twist. Let's start with what we can prove. For an hour, we talked only in rows. He underlined the transfers with notes like solicited, contingent on crisis, pattern. He circled the emergency months that overlapped with discretionary spending, then drew arrows to the emails where Mom used language like promise, temporary, make it up. My stomach did something unglamorous, a slow churn between hurt and relief. Every time a word I had heard spoken across a kitchen table turned into a lever on a legal page. This is Oregon, he said finally, flipping an invisible switch in his head from story to statute. Family law and property law intersect in complicated ways, but you're not in a domestic partnership, you're an adult child. So we look to equity. You may have a claim for unjust enrichment, an equitable lien, constructive trust. Those are remedies that don't care what the deed says as much as they care what the facts show. Courts won't let someone be enriched by another's contributions when that benefit was induced and retained in bad faith. Bad faith, I repeated, the words tasting like metal and something cleaner, like rain. They changed the locks. Did they tell you? He asked, lawyer eyes brightening the way mine do over a tidy reconciliation. I slid my phone across the desk, screen lit with the 11:27 p.m. text, the message that had burned like a stamp into my bones. He took a photo with his tablet, then asked me to email the screenshot so metadata could travel with it. This is helpful, he said, in the careful, professional tone of someone who has learned not to gloat. It demonstrates intent to exclude and deprive. Judges are not fond of cruelty dressed as cleverness. We met 2 more attorneys in the next 10 days, not because I doubted him, but because I had learned from that kitchen table that people like to call me naive. I wanted 3 versions of the truth. Each one said, in their own phrasing, a version of the same thing. Equity isn't only ink. It is also labor, money, reliance, and the ugly clarity of texts that say, you don't have a home anymore. I added a new tab to the spreadsheet, remedies and timelines. Not because I was rushing toward court, because moving deliberately is how I keep myself from running. If they force your hand, my first attorney had said, we petition. We ask the court to recognize your interest. If co-use is impossible, and given the lockout, a judge may agree, partition by sale is on the table. That means selling the house and dividing proceeds according to each party's recognized share. He paused. I know that's not what people imagine as a happy ending. I thought of the maple tree, of gutters I had cleared, until my fingers wrinkled from cold water, of the ceiling I had kept from bowing with emergency bracing at midnight. Happy, I said, is a house I don't have to hold up. That night, I made a second folder labeled Exhibits. I printed the text messages with timestamps. I added the transfers and the contractor quotes and the photographs of my hands when they had been bandaged after the newel post splintered. I took the word gift and set it down in the middle of the desk, like an object I wanted to study under light. Gifts are freely given, unasked, with no expectation of return. None of this matched that shape. Mom's emails said please and promise. Dad's note said temporary and I'll make it right. And the lockout said, we changed all the locks with a flourish. Let's see how brave you are now. Brave, I discovered, is a lot quieter than I'd been taught. It looks like a woman alone at her desk, printing what she already knows, because paper makes knowledge legible to people who weren't there. It sounds like a pen uncapping before it signs a petition. It feels like the steady, unshowy click of a binder ring closing around a case that will not be argued in the kitchen, but under lights so bright they leach melodrama out of the room. I didn't tell them what I had. I didn't warn. I kept my stagehand's hands still and my accountant's brain busy. The next time I saw the three of them, there would be a table again, and folders and voices going brittle. But I would not be the ghost at the doorway. I would be the person who brought the ledger and made the room read it with me. They expected fear to be the point. They didn't understand it was the proof. At 7 a.m., the blinds drew stripes across my wall, and the coffee surface stilled. I had slept the way a runner sleeps before a race, light, ready, my body half leaning at the line. I called my attorney. He picked up on the second ring. File the petition, I said. There was no speech in me, only the sense of something finally cohering. He didn't ask for more. We had rehearsed this move in theory. Now it had a date. 2 days later, my phone lit with an unknown number and a voice that sounded like someone had put a hand on his tie and pulled too tight. Miss Chen, this is counsel for your parents. We have a situation. We'd like to resolve this amicably and immediately. I let the message end. I let an hour pass. I pictured their kitchen, their island-turned war table, and I didn't reply. Let them feel for an afternoon what I had felt for years, that there are processes moving you cannot see. Mediation was scheduled in a downtown conference suite, whose windows made the Willamette look like brushed steel. Fluorescent light hummed with the peculiar cruelty of office brightness. No shadows, no forgiveness. A long table divided the room into ours and theirs, though we both knew the real border was the folder I carried. My attorney checked in with a nod that was neither comforting nor cold. Professional weather, temperate, steady. They entered in the order I knew they would. Mom first, face arranged for composure. Dad behind, color high, volume already in his throat. Amanda last, eyes darting, her uncertainty a soft animal in her arms. I did not stand. I did not greet. This was not a holiday. My attorney set the binder in front of me, then slid a thinner manila folder toward the center of the table, with a calm one might mistake for indifference. It was not indifference. It was aim. What's this? Dad demanded, voice pitched to fill the ceiling panels. Old tone. Coach on a sideline, boss in a garage. I remembered it in my knees. Documentation, my attorney said, opening the folder with deliberate hands, as if the first page were a switch that needed careful toggling. We'll begin with transfers, $47,000 in mortgage contributions from our client over X years. He had the exact range. I was past performing memory tricks for people who never bothered to keep their own. Initiated or solicited by your side, frequently labeled temporary or help. He slid the first exhibit across, a compiled ledger, dates in a left column like vertebrae, amounts aligned in a right column like fence posts. The middle held the notes, temporary help, I'll make it right. And beside each note, a corresponding contemporaneous event, mortgage brought current, county lien avoided, property tax penalties prevented. I watched the document move as if I had never touched it, as if it had arranged itself, truth animating paper. Mom reached for it and misjudged her speed. Pages skittered. She gathered them and smoothed the edges with a palm that had ironed napkins for decades. These were gifts, she said, voice cultured for the room. Family helps family. Gifts, my attorney said lightly, are unrequested, unconditional, and not induced by representations of need. We will be entering emails where you used the terms temporary, promise, make it up, while soliciting funds. We will also enter bank statements. He gestured to a second tab, showing that during certain tight months, you maintained substantial balances and purchased discretionary items. He didn't look at the bracelet on her wrist. I did. It flashed once under the light, a small sun, and I remembered how she touched it absent-mindedly the week she'd asked me to bridge us for property taxes. Dad's laugh tried to arrive and broke on the table's edge. So what? He said, grabbing the next page too hard. She's the responsible one. Families depend on each other. She never asked for a contract. You can't just turn daughterhood into debt. Equity, my attorney said, is older than your deed. Courts do not reward parties who secure benefit through inducement and retention in bad faith. We're asking the court to recognize Ms. Chen's ownership interest in the property via constructive trust and/or an equitable lien grounded in unjust enrichment and reliance. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The room did the amplifying for him. He placed the second exhibit on the table, a timeline chart I had built at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, dates marching left to right, color bars indicating categories, mortgage, utilities, repairs, and on a parallel line, in small clinical text, discretionary spend highlights, Italy deposit week, holiday electronics purchase, summer travel. Amanda's eyes tracked the bars the way you watch weather approach on a radar, fascinated, sick. These are distortions, Mom said, flint now under the silk. We have every right to manage our own accounts. Of course, my attorney replied. We're not here to police taste. We're here to show pattern, inducement, reliance, and benefit retained. And intent. He turned a page, then another, and laid the screenshot down with the grace of a ritual object. The message, in its original font, stared up at all of us. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. 11:27 p.m. Timestamp crisp like a blade. No one spoke. The fluorescent hum seemed to lower, as if the electricity itself had leaned in. Judges, my attorney had said, are not fond of cruelty dressed as cleverness, mediators either. The facilitator, who had been invisible until then, cleared her throat once and looked at my parents with the expression of a person realizing they are in the presence of people who mistake power for wit. Dad recovered first, his face moving through colors as if someone were turning a dial. "That text," he began, then stalled on the verb. "We were upset. She was ungrateful. It was hyperbole." "Hyperbole," my attorney said, not unkindly, as if logging vocabulary, "does not change intent. Exclusion is exclusion, and it is probative that the moment your daughter began asserting her rights, your response was to cut her out bodily and symbolically. That message will read poorly in any room tasked with fairness." He slid the third set of papers across, photographs of receipts for shingles, primer, flashing, contractor quotes I'd secured and we'd declined. A valuation worksheet pricing my labor at conservative market rates for the hours and tasks documented. I had kept the numbers modest even when my hands had urged me to go higher. The worksheet covered the table like a map. Dad's finger hovered over roof work, labor equivalent, then darted away as if the ink might transfer. "This is ridiculous," he said, failing to harness the volume now. "No judge is going to treat chores like billable hours." "Your daughter did not dust a coffee table," my attorney said, still in that temperate weather. "She performed specialized, sustained property maintenance and repair over 13 years, tasks for which a licensed contractor would have billed you at market rates. You solicited those tasks, you benefited. She relied on your repeated assurances that these were temporary measures you would make right. You then took steps to deny her any benefit in the contemplated sale. That is the core of unjust enrichment." Amanda made a sound then, a small intake, like the air leaving a bag. "Wait," she said, turning to them. "You were planning to sell? Without—" She didn't finish. She did not need to. And then I watched the moment the script she'd been given, delicate, cherished, tilted. She was not the villain, but she was not neutral either. Beneficiaries never are. Mom tried a new register. "Jessica, honey," she said, switching from the room's third person to the old kitchen intimacy. "This is all a misunderstanding. You meant for me to keep paying," I said, for the first time allowing my voice to intersect theirs. It sounded different outside my head. Older, maybe, the vowels steady. "You meant for me to hold the house up and then step back when the picture was taken. You meant for me to be useful and quiet." Dad slammed his palm down, the sound a cheap gunshot. "After everything we did for you, raising you, housing you, feeding you, this is how you repay us?" I didn't flinch. Old habits died harder than they had promised, but they died. After 14 years of unpaid labor, after $85,000 in contributions solicited as temporary, after planning a sale that erased me on paper and in practice, after sending a text at 11:27 p.m. daring me to be brave, this is how I correct it. My attorney, who had let that exchange stand like two lines finally crossing, returned to the road. "Our demand is simple and commensurate with the evidence, recognition of Ms. Chen's equitable interest. We will be seeking a 50% ownership stake, supported by documented financial contributions, labor valuations, and the pattern of inducement and exclusion. If co-use proves impossible, and given the lockout, it likely is, we will pursue partition by sale and division of proceeds accordingly." The room reacted the way stress does when it has nowhere to go, first outward, then up. Dad shouted words that pinged off glass. Mom's eyes filled with the kind of tears she had used to salt 1,000 smaller moments. Amanda stared at the timeline as if memorizing a foreign alphabet in a single sitting. I sat very still. There is a silence that belongs to theater and a silence that belongs to a lab. This was the second kind, the moment before a drop of reagent clarifies the solution. The mediator called for a caucus. In the small side room, my attorney looked at me the way one looks at a colleague after a clean presentation. "You did well," he said, which is how professionals say. "You did not give them a scene, you gave them evidence." They may try to negotiate a repayment without recognizing ownership. We will not accept that. Your contributions were not alone. They are equity. I nodded. In my chest, a flock of small birds settled. If they refuse, then we proceed. Petition is filed. Discovery will make their accounts speak. Judges are not fond of parties who write "no home" to their children and then present themselves as injured. Back at the table, there were new cracks in my parents' composure. This time, when Mom reached for the bracelet, she stopped herself halfway, as if remembering it had become a character witness for the wrong side. Dad's hands had the tremor of a man who had always controlled the volume and found the knob missing. Amanda looked at me, really looked, like someone trying to learn the face of a person she had always seen through a doorframe. Nothing settled that day. Mediation is a process, and this one had just begun, but the architecture of the outcome rose in the air like framing, visible to anyone who knows how to read rooms with math in them. They had built a house on extraction and called it love. I had built a ledger and called it what it was. In the light of that conference room, the two structures stood side by side, and one of them swayed. When we left, the city had softened to its afternoon color. The river looked less like steel and more like water. My phone buzzed with nothing that mattered. I put it in my bag and let my hands hang free. Brave, it turns out, is what you call it when you take your receipts into a room that has never counted you and make it read. 6 weeks is a strange unit of time. It's long enough for seasons to shift a shade, short enough that your body still remembers how the panic felt at night. In that span, Discovery made their accounts speak. The petition moved from filing to hearing with a steadiness that felt like someone else's calendar. I kept my head down, my work clean, my inbox sorted into folders, named for things that could not be argued: transfers, utilities, materials, intent. The order arrived on a Wednesday that smelled faintly of rain. Courthouses have their own gravity. Fluorescence flattens sentiment. Everyone becomes a silhouette of roles: petitioner, respondent, counsel, judge. When the court recognized my equitable interest, the words were as spare as a ledger. The judge's phrasing cut embellishment away and left the bone. Based on the evidence of contributions, reliance, inducement, and exclusion, the court recognizes Ms. Chen's 50% ownership interest in the property through equitable remedies. No violin. No gavel theatrics, just an order. I held the stamped copy outside, the paper warm from the machine, and watched my name align with a thing it had always financed but never officially owned. People imagine victory as a shout. Sometimes it's a breath you didn't know you were holding. 6 weeks before, they'd sent a text about locks. Now the state had unlocked a door they thought was theirs alone. I did not walk through it. I didn't move back, into the house that taught my hands to disappear. The place was a museum of splinters and apologies. Every room had a drawer full of favors. Even the kitchen, with its bright island, held the echo of the night. I stood in the doorway and heard my name folded out of the future. I didn't want to sleep under ceilings I had braced at midnight and call it peace. I wanted a structure that didn't require my body to make it stand. When co-use is impossible, the law does not force proximity. We petitioned for partition by sale. It sounds brutal because it is. It's also merciful. You sell the asset and divide the proceeds according to the interests the court has recognized. People imagine this as the courtroom equivalent of a divorce, but the truth was colder and kinder, math in a coat. There were appraisals with men in windbreakers walking the perimeter, murmured estimates in kitchens that had hosted 1,000 dinners. There were forms that looked the way forms always do, boxes and witness lines, and through them ran the thing that had haunted our house for years without a name, the price of what had been built on other people's backs. The sale price came in higher than anyone at our table had gamed out, $680,000. The market was still forgiving, and the work I'd done over those years, the re-roofing, the steady repairs, the unseen vigilance, had made the listing sparkle in ways buyers could feel than if they didn't know why. I watched the number appear in an email like a far shoreline becoming land. Then the division, my share at 50%, $340,000 before fees and taxes. Numbers can look cold until you remember the heat they undo. That figure wasn't a windfall, it was a correction. Here's the part the internet argument threads rarely say out loud. Informal family economies run on the quiet labor of reliable children. They thrive in cultures, any culture, where duty can be stroked until it purrs, and where gift is a word used to rename an obligation you never consented to. The machine is efficient. It asks the same few people 1,000 small things. It calls those asks love. If you are that person, you can spend a decade mistaking depletion for devotion. Paper is how you teach the room another language. Receipts become nouns, timestamps verbs. Courts don't read sentiment, they read sequence. My parents had pinned their retirement to that house. In their version of the future, they sold at a number close to what we achieved, bought a smaller place with cash, parked the remainder in tidy instruments, and lived in a neighborhood where the leaves are raked curbside and everyone waves. I do not know whether that future was deserved. I only know it was funded in their minds by 100% of the proceeds. In the world the order made, they walked away with half before their own fees and taxes. That's still a life. It is not the one they planned. If you hear bitterness in that paragraph, you're reading too quickly. What you're hearing is the sound of a plan meeting its missing line items. The day the funds hit, my screen didn't feel like a slot machine. It felt like a balance rebalancing. I moved pieces with the steadiness I reserve for tasks that can undo a person if done in a hurry. I paid my attorney. I paid the tax estimates. Then I did the thing no one ever taught me to do. I gave my own future a line item with my name on it. Not a shared family envelope, not a bridge, not temporary. A down payment. The townhouse I chose is across town, on a street that forgets to be loud. Maybe you'll think me sentimental, but I picked it for its quiet corners and the way afternoon light throws a rectangle on the wall that could be a window to another house entirely. It's smaller than the Colonial, but that's part of the relief. There are no gutters to climb, no sump pump that coughs in the night like an old dog. There are locks, yes, and the keys belong to me. The first evening I stood in the kitchen, I opened every cabinet just to hear a hinge move without obligation. I set 2 mugs on the counter and didn't spend a moment calculating who else needed warmth. They reached out, of course. My father's emails had the cadence of someone testifying in a church he doesn't attend. After everything we sacrificed for you, this is how you repay us. My mother's voicemails trilled the higher notes of regret. Family forgives, Jessica. You'll regret this when we're gone. Amanda tried for the middle register, the mediator's calm. I didn't blame her for trying to keep us all on the same page. I had simply decided to write in another book. I set the filters. I let the messages fall into a folder named for things I check less and grieve without rereading. People taught me that boundaries were a wall. I have learned they are a door you keep your own key to. If you grew up being the solution, reclaiming the right to be a person feels rude at first. It isn't. It's arithmetic you were never taught. And it doesn't always require scorched earth. There are families where a conversation and a contract suffice. There are houses where parents look up one day and see the ledger clearly, and something like fairness appears. This was not that house. I don't begrudge the people whose stories end with a hug and a promise kept. Mine ended with an order and a sale and a set of keys labeled only with my name. Happy, I decided, was the kind of house you don't have to hold up. In the weeks after, small rituals replaced old ones. Saturday mornings, I walk without looking for tasks. I learned that a Sanders hum and a kettle's whistle are not the same timbre, and my body doesn't need to brace when it hears the second. I hung a painting Amanda made me years ago, blue on blue, horizon blurred, and I didn't narrate the act to anyone or ask permission from a wall. A friend came over and asked what it felt like. I said, legible. She laughed until she saw I meant it. If you're listening for advice, there isn't any in here that fits on a mug. Only a suggestion. Keep a paper trail, not because you want to fight, but because you want to remember. Keep your generosity, but count it. Call love by its right name, and if it starts dressing up as extraction, don't be afraid to use another vocabulary. Judges are human. They respond to cruelty written down. So do you. So did I. Sometimes on my couch, I open the photograph of the court order and stare at the lines as if they were a map I once got lost on and finally learned how to read. The text about locks still lives on my phone, filed under exhibits, its timestamp as crisp as the afternoon light on my floor. It does not hurt anymore. It functions as a hinge in memory, the little metal piece around which a door swings from one room to the next. Some doors slam. This one just clicked. There is a trick to building a life. You learn which parts are structural and which are staging. The old house taught me both. It taught me how much a body can hold and how much it should not. It taught me that the numbers were not cold. They were the warmest truth available when love became a translation error. And it taught me that you can leave without hatred, only with a ledger that balances and a lock that turns quietly in your own hand. Some endings don't arrive with a crash. They arrive with a recalibration. The way a scale finally finds zero and sits there, honest and quiet. In the months after the sale and the move, I kept waiting for a surge of triumph to break over me. The cinematic swell that makes victory legible from the back row. It didn't come. What came instead was steadiness. It came in small confirmations. A door that opened with a key that was mine, a bill with only my name, a Saturday that didn't audition me for usefulness. If the first chapter of my life taught me to be a stagehand for other people's story, this chapter taught me to be the narrator of my own. There are things I still carry. You don't spend 14 years training your body to anticipate need and then wake up empty-handed. Sometimes I hear a sound at night, a pipe settling, a wind push, and my feet are already on the floor before I remember there is no crawl space demanding me. I don't resent that reflex. It's a skill set. The difference now is consent. I choose when to fix. I choose what to hold. Choice is not a luxury, it's a boundary with a hinge. People ask about forgiveness as if it were a finish line at the end of a neighborhood fun run, a ribbon you break to prove you're good. I don't know if forgiveness is the right word for what I feel. I know this. I don't wish my parents hunger or harm. I don't wake up plotting, which is its own kind of peace. I also do not offer to return to a table set with the same utensils that cut me. Love without a ledger isn't moral, it's careless. We talk a lot in this country about healing. We talk less about accountability as a form of love. The law gave me a language for that. It took the raw, complicated mess of family and translated it into facts, sequence, reliance, remedy. Did it fix everything? Of course not. But it fixed the one thing I needed to move forward. It made my contributions legible in a room that doesn't run on guilt. If you are in a house like the one I grew up in, if the phrase family helps family has been used like a silk ribbon to tie your wrists together, I want to offer you something simpler than advice. Keep a record. Not because you want a courtroom. Most people won't need one. Keep it because our minds are kind to the people who ask a lot of us. Kindness erases detail. Paper restores it. When you can see the shape of your giving, you can choose it with your eyes open, or you can change it without being called cruel. Boundaries and records are cousins. They both say, "Here are the edges of me." I think about Amanda more than I talk about her. We are finding a new distance that doesn't require me to vanish to keep the peace. Her painting hangs in my living room, a horizon barely there, blue interrogating blue. We text sometimes in that tentative way siblings do when they are learning to speak without the family echo. I don't ask her to pick sides. I ask her to tell me when her next show is. She sends me pictures of the light in her studio. I send her a photo of my kettle releasing one perfect thread of steam. In the middle of all this, adulthood persists. It is less dramatic than television, but it's also less cruel. It is a series of ordinary choices that add up to a life. And my parents? They're not villains in a play. They're people who made choices inside a system that rewarded extraction dressed as virtue. They're people who expected the machine to run forever and were furious when the motor filed a petition. Sometimes I imagine the house we sold, another family moving through it, a new set of hands on the banister I sanded, a child measuring herself on a doorframe I once brushed with primer. It doesn't make me ache the way I thought it would. The house doesn't need me anymore. That's the point. I learned to stop needing it back. There is a philosophy I keep returning to. Justice does not have to be loud to be real. We glamorize explosions and overlook the quiet hinge. A text at 11:27 p.m. meant to exile me became the exhibit that anchored a petition. The ladders I climbed as a girl became the valuation that proved my contributions weren't sentimental. They were structural. The receipts I kept because neatness soothed me became a bridge from love as depletion to love as choice. The story was never about humiliating anyone in a courthouse. It was about telling the truth under light bright enough to burn the theatrics away. If you've stayed with me to the end, thank you. I mean that in the non-performative way. Attention is a currency more precious than the numbers we all chase. I hope you're listening in a room that feels safe. I hope your locks belong to you and the people who have keys earned them. I hope your Saturdays aren't an audition and your generosity has a door you can close when you need rest. I hope, if you grew up like I did, apprenticed to exhaustion, you find a way to turn your skill into sovereignty, not servitude. I want to leave you with something gentler than a lesson, a wish. May your work be seen. May your boundaries be honored. May your family, chosen or given, understand that love without consent is a form of harm, and that apologies are not the same as amends. May you have the paperwork you need when softness fails, and the softness you need so you rarely have to use the paperwork. May your home be a verb you conjugate in first person. I build, I rest, I invite. This channel exists because stories like mine are not rare, they're just quiet. If something in this story sounded like your life, if you recognized the cadence of the temporary ask, the asterisk glued to the word gift, the way someone called you responsible because it made them feel less so, know this, you are not alone. Drop your experience in the comments if you want. Tell us where your breaking point was, or the small pivot that kept you from breaking. Someone else is reading and taking notes for their own petition, whether that petition ends at a courthouse or at a kitchen table where they finally say no. If you found strength, clarity, or even a single sentence here that made your life feel more legible, I'd be grateful if you'd subscribe. Not because algorithms are hungry, though they are, but because every shared story makes the next correction easier for the next person. This space is for turning the private arithmetic of survival into public language, for teaching each other the difference between loyalty and leverage. I'll be here, telling truths that hold under bright lights. Until then, I'm wishing you good health and a peaceful home, however you define it. May your doors open when you want them to, and close when you need them to. May your mornings arrive without dread, your evenings end with ease, and your family, however you assemble it, practice a kind of love that does not ask you to disappear to prove it exists. Thank you for listening to the end of this one. The lock they changed doesn't matter now. I have my own keys.